Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Get ready for the greatest roast of all time, the Roast of Tom Brady, a Netflix live event happening May 5th. Hosted by Kevin Hart, the 7-time world champion gets his cleats held to the fire by famous friends and frenemies on an unforgettable night where everything is fair game. Tune in on May 5th at 5 p.m. Pacific time for the Roast of Tom Brady, live only on Netflix.
Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-A Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for 1 bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to Women's Hoops and Talks, the What podcast, where we are elevating the voice of women in basketball. We are part of the Almighty Baller Network. You can find us in the Blazers Edge podcast feed. I'm Tara. Unfortunately, Kendall's not able to make it today, but don't worry, I do have someone else joining me. She is the Editor-in-Chief of Mavs Moneyball. That's the SB Nation site covering the Dallas Mavericks. So please welcome Rebecca Lawson. So glad to have you on the podcast today.
So glad to join you tonight.
Well, let's just dive right in and talk a little bit about where you've been and how you got where you are today and talk about some basketball. So could you tell us a little bit about how you ended up being the editor-in-chief of Mavs Moneyball? Kind of like maybe how you got started with sports and basketball and how you ended up writing and covering them.
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a funny story. I've been really into sports since I was small. My dad was a huge football and baseball fan, and so he kind of brought me into Cowboys fandom. And back then it was Astros fandom. I've since become a Rangers fan. But when I started to look for a new sport to cover, I was kind of interested in, looking into, like what's basketball about, and I had never really followed it. And around the time the Mavericks were making their championship run in 2011. Was also, so I'm from San Diego, and that was around the time that Kawhi Leonard was making a run in the NCAA tournament with San Diego State Aztecs. And so my roommate at the time was an Aztecs alum. And so we watched all of the Aztecs games, and, Kawhi was amazing. And I was kind of like, this basketball thing is really cool. I'm not really ready to be done with it. And that was around the time the Mavericks playoff run in 2011 had started. Ironically, they were playing the Blazers in that first round. And so, obviously it was an amazing series for the Mavs, and Dirk was fantastic, and they kind of got me hooked during that playoff series. So I started following the Mavericks after that and just kind of teaching myself everything about basketball. So I'm really a recent basketball fan, having started following NBA in 2011. And I took a new job a couple of years later, moved to Dallas. It was on my list for a variety of reasons, not necessarily related to being a Mavericks fan.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being a sports fan and living, it's kind of a unique experience for those of your audience who've never experienced living in the same city as your sports team. I had never had that when I was growing up because I was always a Texas sports fan, but I was always living in California. And so when I got the opportunity to take a job in Dallas, I was like, well, this is cool because it'll be, great, a new city for me, and it'll be a cool experience being able to follow all my sports teams and actually go to the games. And so when I got to Dallas, I started looking for friends and looking for a community. And I had been following Mavs Moneyball, the folks who were writing there at the time, and kind of connected with a few of them on Twitter. And finally, I just straight up asked one of them, I'm like, hey, would you guys be able to use another writer? I mean, my NBA experience isn't, I don't really know a lot of X's and O's, but I think I could bring a different perspective to the site. And they agreed to let me join, and I just kind of worked my way up from there. So it's kind of a cool story that, like, ironically, the guy who's, well, maybe not so much going to be playing for the Spurs in the future, but we won't get into that, was the guy for a rival team, basically brought me into Mavericks fandom. So I'm always grateful to Kawhi Leonard for bringing me into the cool experience that it has been being a Mavericks fan.
Well, since you have a long time knowledge of Kawhi and his game and a little bit more you have a lot more information about him than I do, because I did not follow him when he was in college. I'd love to know what your take is on what's going on with him and the Spurs right now.
It's such a strange thing, because I just kind of assumed the Spurs are the kind of organization, as we all know who follow the NBA even a little bit closely, they don't really lose players. Like, players maybe decide to move on for various reasons, but they're a destination team. They're a team that people want to come to. And so it's very strange to me to see this whole thing going on around the team. They've been in the media for negative reasons, which is just so uncommon. And I don't know that I know much more than anyone else about why this is happening. I don't know what Kawhi's beef with the team is. I know he's not a big talker. He's not a big publicity guy. So I don't think I have any special insight other than just it's strange to see this in the media so much, because I know Kawhi does like to stay out of the spotlight as much as possible. So I don't know if their relationship is going to be repaired or not. Latest things that I have seen indicate that maybe he would move on to another team, and that's what the Spurs are kind of preparing for him to move on to another team. And yet they're still in the playoffs because, of course, they're the Spurs, or they're probably in the playoffs. So, Spurs will never, as a Mavericks fan, the old joke is that the Spurs will just never, ever, ever die. So
yeah, I have a debate going on with my other podcast host about whether or not the Spurs are more like vampires or White Walkers.
Oh my gosh, that's a great debate.
Which, I mean, I'm like fully in the vampire camp, because obviously Manu Ginobili was bit by a bat, which is where it all started. Dan has some compelling arguments about the White Walkers, but we don't have to talk about the Spurs for a really long time. I would love to hear about the Dallas 2011 run, because it was so like, when we look back on it, it's kind of like, where did that come from? It was like this moment in time where everything just came together. What can you recall about the team that year, and where you thought maybe, wow, this is it. They may be doing it.
It's such a cool year to look back on. And I'm biased as a Mavericks fan, but when you put the 2011 championship in context of kind of the championships that have surrounded them, and you look at teams like the Spurs, teams like, I was going to say the Heat, but really any team LeBron James is on. Like, let's face it. Teams that continually are winning these championships year in and year out. And you don't really see a lot of teams just kind of come out of nowhere to kind of break that mold like you do occasionally in the NFL or occasionally in baseball or, something like that. And so in that sense, the Mavericks championship year is really a very unique period in, I think, NBA history, and just in terms of having such a strange little team kind of have almost like a Cinderella run. And so the things I remember the most about that series or that period of time and that run is really just, first of all, how magical the team was in terms of just always having another comeback in them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they would just not die. It's like you would think they would be done, and the games would always be so competitive, and then they would just kind of come out of nowhere, and there was a different hero every night. It wasn't always Dirk. It was, sometimes it was Deshaun Stevenson, sometimes it was JJ Barea, sometimes it was one of those little guys who you see them make one of those small contributions in one of those games in such a way that just allowed the team to magically make that run. And it was, every game in that sense was just kind of amazing. And you kind of were always waiting for it to end, and it just somehow never did. And it was magical. And I kind of wish that I had picked up following the team a little bit before I did, because I know for friends of mine who were longtime Mavs fans, that was a long suffering victory for them. Mm-hmm. And, having just picked up following the team that year, I was, riding a high right when I started following them, but it's been long suffering since then. So I guess the next championship around, I'll be able to claim I got through the suffering too.
That's funny. Well, a couple of things about that run, with that's the championship run that I always think of, because Portland is a team right now that is building from within. We're not a team that has been able to attract a bunch of superstars. And I always kind of I always have that Dallas team in the back of my mind as kind of a model of a team that stuck with it and built and had who they had. They had like a superstar or a couple like really amazing players, but there was a lot of role players doing what they needed to do. So I'm always looking at the Trailblazers thinking maybe they could create something like, catch lightning in a bottle like they did in Dallas during that time. But I have to tell you also that if you ask a lot of Portland Trailblazers fans what one of their favorite memories is, for a lot of people, it was that Brandon Roy game in that series where he came in and scored 24 points. I think it was 24 points in the last quarter. It was like a surprise comeback after having knee surgery, and he came out and he left it all on the floor. It was incredible. I remember watching that game with my kids in like a pizza place, and just like by the time the game was over, like all of the cooks were out of the kitchen, all of the waiters, we were all standing together watching the game together, watching Brandon Roy just transcend everything. And then I think that was pretty much the last time he played in Portland. It was like quite an amazing show. But what this was leading to is that, it brought us all together. And you mentioned that when you moved to Dallas, you were kind of looking for a community. I'd love to hear, like, over the course of your life, as a sports fan, how has sports contributed to your feeling a part of a community?
Well, it's really been, it's been kind of a weird experience for me, because growing up in a city, San Diego is such an interesting city. That's where I grew up, and it's where I live now. And it's such an interesting city in terms of sports, because there's not really a big sports community in San Diego. We have a Major League Baseball team, but they really suck right now. It's the Padres, for those of you who don't know. They're not worth watching a game, I promise you, because my husband forces me to watch way too many of them. And, we had an NFL team until last year when they chose to move up to LA for basically money reasons. And so, there's not really a big sports community here. And so that's why when, I referenced the Aztecs and their 2011 NCAA championship run, that's why that was so special, is because when we do have those sports moments in San Diego, people really rally around them. And so I've always been kind of a fish out of water in terms of, I grew up a Cowboys fan. Well, if I walk into a bar, and I think a lot of people will resonate with this, especially as women, you walk into a bar and you have to ask the bartender, like, oh, can you put on like the whatever game? And for me, it was always the Cowboys or the Mavericks. And, they kind of look at you like, oh, you really are interested in this sports game? Or are you just kind of like pretending to be interested in sports to like get a guy or something like that? And, no, it's like, I can't even tell you how many times I've been quizzed on, like, do you really know the starting offensive line for the Cowboys? And, all that kind of fun stuff that we've, I think, all been quizzed on at one point or another. But when I moved to Dallas, it was really cool because it really allowed me to see what a city rallying around a team on a regular basis does. And, I really found a lot of my never-ending friends that are going to be lifelong friends for me when I moved to Dallas for those 3 years. So when I joined the Mavs Moneyball staff, I actually joined, and then after about a year on staff, I was credentialed. And so I was going to every single home game. And some of those guys that I met, and women who I met through the team, are just lifelong friends of mine and will be forever. One of them is going to come out to see my daughter in a couple months, and it's just amazing, the community of friends that I've built up through being credentialed and through going to these games. And, through living in a sports city where, people do rally around the games. It's, kind of like you mentioned your experience with going to watch that game, the playoff game. You go to any bar on an NFL Sunday in Dallas and everyone's rooting for the Cowboys. It's amazing. And you go to any bar in San Diego on an NFL Sunday and people might be rooting for a team and they're all rooting for different teams. And it's, so it's just kind of amazing being in a city that rallies around sports. And I think that's really contributed to my sense of community in, just being around those same people and experiencing those highs and those lows with each other. And I think that's just such an emotional experience, as, diehard sports fans know, that it's really contributed to my community.
Yeah, those highs and lows will really bring you together, won't they? I'd love to learn more about Dirk Nowitzki. Now, I think it's so interesting. There are so few players anymore who play for a team their entire career, much less for 20 years. And now Dirk is out there saying that if he feels good next year, he's going to keep playing. Yep. So what does Dirk meant to you as a fan of this team? What are you going to miss about him when he's gone? And yeah, just like I love to hear your thoughts on what it's like to have somebody so closely connected for such a long time to a team.
Yeah, Dirk is just, I can't even start to explain how much he means to not only me as a Mavericks fan, but just to the whole Mavericks community and, what he should mean to NBA fans in general. It's, like you said, it's so rare to have a guy stick with a team. Not only, maybe a team like the Spurs or a team like, I'm trying to think of another example of a long-lived team that, people want to come to. But for the Mavs, they've had so many low years in their history and so few high years, although they did have a pretty good stretch there before the championship and a little bit after. But to have Dirk stay with the team through all those highs and lows, I think it just goes to show you don't have many superstars who are humble. You don't have many superstars who feel strongly about paying it back to the team that, basically got them their championship or got them to where they are in their career. And Dirk is I've been around him a lot. As I mentioned, I was credentialed for a couple years and, I've been in the locker room around him. He is the most genuine, most humble guy you will ever meet. And he's got a great sense of humor. We always joke that he should do Saturday Night Live because he's got this dry, raw sense of humor that's hilarious. And he's humble and he's nice. And you don't see that a lot in superstars. And you don't see them taking substantial pay cuts to stay with the team. But he's often said, he started with the Mavericks. Dallas is his home. And, he's been pretty vocal about the fact that if they had never won a championship, he probably would have looked to go elsewhere. But once they won that championship, he was like, this is my home. Mark Cuban and Rick Carlisle and the guys who have been around him for most of his career are his family in a sense. And he's really not looking to leave. There have been some rumors here and there about whether he would go to another team and try to chase another championship. But I've always known that those rumors were nothing but, headlines stirred up to get clicks because he's just not that kind of guy. And so what it has meant to have him here in Dallas and stay in Dallas, it's meant in some of these recent down years, it's a reason to keep watching the games. And I will watch every Mavericks game if for no other reason than to watch Dirk hit a trail three or to hit a fadeaway jumper, because those moments are becoming increasingly rare in his career. And, I want to treasure all of them. And, my daughter she's a month old and she probably won't remember any, she definitely won't remember any game that we watched together. But, I want to be able to tell her that this was, this is the team you're a fan of, and this is the greatest player that ever played for them. So it's really cool to have that experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite things about watching the game of basketball? What are your favorite things to watch, favorite moves, maybe some of your favorite players over the years?
That's a great question. I'm going to blank on probably favorite players that I've been able to watch throughout the years, but I will say that, this kind of goes back to your question of kind of what sports has meant to me as a community. One of my favorite things about the NBA is I feel like unlike any other sports league, there really is kind of a community of involved fans around the NBA. And, people who are listening to your podcast, I'm not sure if they're Twitter people or not, but one of the things that I've really enjoyed in terms of following the NBA closely is just the community of people on Twitter who can all be watching a game together and all be freaking out together and all geek out together about usually it's the playoffs where everyone's watching the same game at the same time. But I've always thought that one of the funny things is someone could be, tweeting, "Oh my God, that's such an amazing play." And you don't know what game they're talking about because they could be talking about one of 10 games going on at that point. And so I still remember some days in Dallas when I was flipping through, Mavericks would be out of town and I'd be flipping through League Pass or something like that. And just, being able to stay up and just watch different games and different players and being able to follow different storylines. And the NBA is so much fun. It's not like Major League Baseball is so boring and mound visit limitations and what are people even talking about these days? And, I'm a huge Cowboys fan, so I won't say the NFL is boring, but I think the writers around it are less than interesting for the most part. And, the NBA just has so many fun writers around it, fun personalities around it. I love that, one day you're hearing a story about J.R. Smith untying someone's shoelaces, and, and it's like a big deal and everyone's talking about it. And, I just like that everyone has fun. Everyone seems to have a great sense of respect for each other. And I really do feel like it's one of the leagues where women's voices are being heard in terms of sports media a lot more than in other places. So that's one of the cool things about it for me.
It's definitely a league that never lets you down in terms of always having another story right on the horizon. Whether or not, like you said, the story is about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or about whether or not, the secret wine clubs, or about just amazing plays that people who are, 39, 40 years old are still making or even young rookies who are breaking out. Yeah. Every night there's a new and exciting story that you didn't think was going to happen. Yep. So you mentioned highs and lows earlier. And so what's the etiquette for talking to somebody whose team is not racing for the top? Yeah. So is it okay to say that?
They're definitely taking at this point.
Yeah, so Dallas is having a year. What's it like being a fan of a team or reporting on a team who is aiming for that top lottery spot?
Oh man, I feel like this season has been very interesting in terms of, we knew going into this season that the Mavs would be tanking essentially.
So they knew right from the beginning. That's pretty much what the plan was. Because in Portland, we're always in this place where we're like debating, like, are they going to tank? Should they tank? And for like the last 2 years, there was always this like peripheral tank discussion. And so it was like really uncomfortable because nobody knew like which way they were going to go. And the team was like, no way we're going to do it. There's no way. But now you have a team where you have the owner taking the players out and telling them that the best thing for them to do is lose.
Man, Mark Cuban needs to shut his mouth sometimes, I swear. I love him dearly. We can get into that later. But, he needs to shut his mouth sometime about stuff like that. But no, it's interesting. And I feel like I need to take lessons from Sixers fans who have endured this for so many years until, basically this past year, the past couple years. But it's a challenge. It's a real challenge to cover a team that is, I won't say they're actively trying not to win, but the way Rick Carlisle usually puts it is some variation on, with the roster we have, there's a certain built-in number of losses, which is a very, very polite way of saying we don't expect to win games this year. And so when you do something like what the Mavs did the other night, when they trotted out a lineup, I think that was like, JJ Barea for like 10 minutes of the game and then mysteriously left with an injury, is suddenly out for the season. And, that ankle surgery that Dirk was probably not going to have till the end of the season. All of a sudden after that Blazers game, mysteriously, he's like, oh no, I guess I'll just have that ankle surgery now. It's just
the devastating win for the Dallas Mavericks is what Naked called it.
No, it's a challenge covering the team just from the perspective of, there are only so many things to write about in a season where you don't have a lot of highs. Mm-hmm. And so you have to try really hard to find little things like, Dennis Smith is obviously a pretty big bright spot for the team right now. And so, there's only so many times you can write about, oh, that cool Dennis Smith dunk from last night, or, let's check in on how he's doing with this particular statistic or something like that. So you really do have to try to find little spots to write about. And so what I've encouraged my writers on Mavs Moneyball to do is to go find little plays and make them into bigger things. So go break down a particular lineup or a particular play or a particular player's shooting percentage or something. Find an obscure stat or something like that and turn it into 500 words or 750 words. And, so that's how we try to keep the coverage fresh and interesting, is to find, obviously if Dirk has a big game, that's worth writing about because everyone loves to still hear about Dirk. But you have to just go try to find the little things, and you have to try not to let it get you down from game to game. And, it's been kind of fun towards the end of the season, because before I was just watching the games and I was just kind of like, well, I'm rooting for a fun game, and if they lose, fine, and if they win, fine. But as we've gotten towards the end of the season, now that I actively have something to root for, even if it's losses, it's actually kind of made it more fun to watch, because at least I know what I'm rooting for at this point. So
something you can get behind.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a challenge, but you have to, especially as editor-in-chief of the blog, you have to try to find ways for your staff to embrace it and make it more fun, even if it's only fun in kind of a self-depreciating kind of way.
I want to talk a little bit more about how you've been covering the Mavericks during this year with the recent harassment story that came out in Sports Illustrated.
Man, Cuban never gives us a reason not to write about the team, does he?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess my first question about the harassment allegation or story, actually, maybe you could summarize it for folks who aren't up to speed about what happened. I think most people have a vague idea, but maybe give a little synopsis. And then my first question though is like, did you know about, like, did any of this surprise you?
Sure. So just to kind of summarize what's going on at, kind of where we were and where we are now. There was a story that came out in Sports Illustrated. I think it was, let's see, my kid was born a month ago, so it was a little before she was born, so like 5 or 6 weeks ago. That basically outlined a history within the Dallas Mavericks, not involving players at all, but in their back office. So their, marketing folks and, ticket sales and things like that. And it turns out that the CEO, a guy by the name of Dermot Usuri, and the director of human resources were actually fairly blatantly sexually harassing a lot of their staff. They weren't creating an environment where women especially could feel supported. It was essentially a boys' club. And, if you haven't read the Sports Illustrated article and are interested in learning more, I encourage you to go look it up because it's got a lot of detail. And so the second part of that was they had the Mavericks had a beat writer, Earl Sneed, who had been accused of domestic violence and had actually pled guilty to domestic violence once, who had remained with the team and was with the team up until the story came out. So that's kind of the crux of the allegations. Where we kind of are today is the Mavericks have initiated a independent investigation. I do trust that it's independent. It's been signed off on by the commissioner, and he, has said that he feels it is independent, so he's fine with it. They've kind of revamped their back office staff. They've hired someone new to come in who has a very good reputation to kind of investigate and clean house and do, the internal things that need to be done to change the workplace culture that has been so pervasive for so long. So there's kind of two parts to the story. One of them is the sexual harassment stuff that was going on that affected the team in that particular way. And then the other part of it is Earl Sneed, who was the beat writer who remained on staff after the team knew about the allegations. So in terms of being surprised by this or unsurprised by it, I have to say that I think to a T, every single one of us was incredibly surprised.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yes. I've been around the team for a long time at this point, for several years, at least recently. And, I've been credentialed, and I still try to go to games up in Los Angeles when the team's in town. So I've kind of maintained my credential status that way. I knew Earl Sneed. He was, always very nice to me. Helpful in, times when I needed help. A lot of times I would go to the games in LA and I'd know my way around Staples Center at the beginning. And he was very helpful in, helping me out and helping me around. It was always had a nice word for me. And, a lot of my staff has had similar interactions with him. He was a little bit of a player, but it gave off that vibe, I should say. But, I don't think any of us expected that he was, going to be accused of domestic violence and have pled guilty to domestic violence. And the harassment culture, none of us knew about because, as a reporter, you're around the players. You're not really around the marketing people and the, and things like that. And so it just came as a shock because, Mark Cuban he really does have his hands in everything that relates to the team. And, he claims he didn't know about a lot of this that was going on, that he was relying on the CEO and the HR director to update him, which obviously they were part of the problem. So they're not getting good updates from them. But, it was surprising just because I feel like Mark Cuban is not the kind of guy who would allow that to continue. And there have been some things that have come out since then in terms of, he did know Earl had pled guilty to domestic violence and chose to keep him with the team. He did have his hands in some of the stuff that was going on in the back office, although to what extent is not really clear. And so to me, that's been extremely disappointing. And it's been very hard because this is a team that I thought had a great culture around them, whether or not they were winning or losing. At least they respected their employees. They had a lot of diversity on their staff, still have a lot of diversity on their staff. And to have something like this hit the team is just, as a fan, it's very hard to reconcile because this is the team that you watch day in and day out. And it's very hard to reconcile that this stuff was going on, especially as a woman, that, Mark chose to keep Earl on staff, even knowing that he beat his girlfriend and pled guilty to it and did it a second time and kept him on staff. And to me, that's so disheartening. And, I mentioned earlier, I'm a big Mark Cuban fan. And this stuff surrounding the team has made me question whether I should be a big Mark Cuban fan, because I don't know how involved he was. Obviously, there's an investigation and we'll find out more. But, as the owner of the team, the buck stops with him. And he had to have some idea, at least with Earl, he's admitted to knowing, what had happened with him. And if he admits to that, then, he had to have had some idea of stuff that was going on around the team. So I'm going to be very interested to see what comes out of the investigation, and I'll reserve judgment until then. But I will say it took us all by surprise and ultimately has been very disappointing.
A couple of follow-up questions. One thing is that the articles made really clear that there were that the players were not involved in this, and even in fact the article went out of its way to talk to people who said, no, the locker room is actually where I felt safer.
Right.
But I'm wondering, how have you seen, or has there been much talk about how any of this has affected the players? Like, did it get through to them, or did they have any reactions, or were they pretty sheltered from everything that was going on? How have the players been affected by all of this that you know of?
So my understanding is that the players really had just as much idea as the rest of the general public did when this broke. So, Dirk did, make some comments about it right after it happened, indicated that he was very sorry for all the victims and for all the people who were involved and the people who were hurt. It didn't really seem like he had any idea. And, as I mentioned earlier, he's such a good guy. He's not really the kind of guy who I would see sticking around a team for as long as he has in his 20-year career. Mm-hmm. He knew that was the culture around it. He has a daughter. He's very respectful of women. I've been in the locker room I was there for 2 straight seasons, I think, on Credential. And then I've been in their locker room in LA. And, the players are very respectful of women. There's a fair amount of female reporters around the team and female staff. Their director of communication, Sarah Melton, is a woman. And, it's just the locker room was a great place. It was a place that I always felt welcome. And so it's very interesting to see, the players' reactions seem just as shocked as the rest of us, those who have spoken out, which haven't been many. And, they're keeping quiet, and rightfully so. Like, there's no reason that they should get involved in, an investigation that's happening in a different part of the team. But, Dirk's made some public comments. Rick Carlisle's made some public comments, to the same extent of like, yeah, it's disappointing, but, we've got a season to play and we've got, work to do, and, we'll let the investigation play out. So they've been fairly quiet about it. But my guess is that they were just as shocked as the rest of us. But, they're not affected by it, and they don't have any choice but to continue to play. So I think they're doing the best they can, which is issuing, statements where they can that are, fairly politically correct, and then, moving on with playing. So
now, after the initial shock wore off, mm-hmm. you're the managing editor of a big site that has to cover the team. So what were your initial, your first reactions for what you would do as the editor for this site? And how did you decide, or how did you move forward in your coverage of the team?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We chose to take and if anyone who's read our site won't be surprised by what I'm about to say is that we chose to take kind of a 2-pronged approach. One was that we didn't feel like it was responsible journalism to ignore the scandal, and there are a few websites out there or a few media outlets in Dallas, I should say, who we felt were kind of irresponsible in their coverage. There was, the Dallas Morning News essentially published a statement from Earl that was, unfiltered. We chose to really call out the media coverage on that side of it, and call out people who, we felt were covering the harassment scandal irresponsibly. And we did. We felt like a lot of the old school media in Dallas was covering it with the perspective of, we're part of the boys club too. And, we're going to give a pass to Earl. There was a journalist who had a radio show who basically let Earl come on and defend himself with kind of no pushback. And so we chose to be very aggressive and just kind of be the counterpoint. And we called out the media coverage. But at the same time, we still have to do game previews and game recaps. And we want to cover the action that's going on in the court and be fair to the players who really had nothing to do with this. So what I told my staff, and the consensus we kind of came to, was we want to cover this harassment scandal. We want to cover it responsibly. And we want to be the voice out there in the media that, we don't feel that the traditional media outlets are being, and advocate for the victims and advocate for culture change. But at the same time, the players weren't involved in this. And so we can still, basically what I told my husband, who was like, I don't know if I want my daughter to be a Dallas Mavericks fan anymore. And I told him, I'm like, you know what? The players didn't do this. Mm-hmm. This wasn't a culture of, locker room boys club or anything like that. This was something that was back office. And the players still have to go out there and play, and they have to represent this team. And Dirk has been with this team for so long. And I can't see myself stopping being a fan of this team for this reason, because I love the players so much. And because I think it's not fair to them to lose my support for something that they weren't involved in. And so we continued to cover the team from a game perspective the way we always have. And I thought that was the only fair way to do it.
Now, as the season winds down, is there anything else that you expect to develop? Anything you all are waiting to hear about on this story, or what's next in this whole story?
So I think the only thing we're really waiting for is the results of the independent investigation at this point. And there are stories that continue to kind of trickle out. There was one of the women who spoke to Sports Illustrated for the story who did a follow-up where she, essentially, came out herself and was like, I want my name to be out there, and I want everyone to know that this is not anonymous people making these complaints. And so I think there will continue to be small things like that. There was the whole thing where someone dug up some police interview with Mark Cuban related to a harassment thing that happened several years ago. So I think there will continue to be small stories like that, and we will cover those as they come out. But, I think at this point, everyone's getting a little fatigued with it. And so I think the thing we're really just waiting for are the results of this independent investigation to come out. And I don't know. I've been given no indication as to when that will be. So like I said, we'll continue to cover the smaller stories as they come out, but ultimately I think we're just waiting for that investigation.
Well, thank you for sharing what was going on, because that was a heavy story. I remember when that came out I was shocked. I mean, I'm sure my shock was nothing compared to yours, but to have to simultaneously process it, you having been associated with the team and knowing people in the team who work for the team, like, you have to process it, like, this is happening to these people that I work with, and at the same time as you have to keep doing your job of covering the team. That must have been really hard. So glad you made it out of there. That sounds like it was probably really tense. Moving on to another topic, what kind of summer do you think is in store for Dallas in terms of the types of things that people are going to do? I guess you're hoping for a high lottery pick.
Yes, we are. Hoping for a high lottery pick, obviously. We have two guys on our blog who cover college pretty well, who cover college for our blog, and they've been watching them write and debate has been a lot of education for me, because I don't follow NCAA very closely. And so, every article that the two of them write is just a hardcore education for me. So I'm starting to get to the point where I know these college players' names like the back of my hand. And, so I'll be very interested to see who the Mavericks go for in the draft and where they end up landing in the draft, because I think that will be, it's kind of strange. Last year was one of the first years that the draft was actually a significant thing for the Mavericks. And it was just so strange to actually be following the draft that closely, because we're so used to the Mavericks. The Mavericks historically just have bad drafts. And so I don't know if it's scouting or whatever it is, but they have a tendency to pick like a combo guard from some university that no one's heard of. And, so that's how we end up not having players that actually stay with the team for a while or that are any good. And so Dennis Smith was really the first player that the Mavericks have drafted that there's been genuine excitement around, in terms of having someone who appears to be a game changer, appears to be legitimately amazing, and is someone who the franchise can build around. And so I know we're all hoping for, another similar type pick that, wherever they end up landing in the draft, but someone who can also kind of be a young guy who can be around the franchise, who can be a game changer. And so we can start building, and the team has said, and Cuban has said, and the organization has said, they don't really want to tank for a number of years. They don't want to be the next Sixers. So I think they're looking for someone who can change the game fast. I also expect the Mavs to be really active in free agency. They have the most cap space of any team. I believe it's the most cap space of any team in the league going into the summer. And so I would be shocked if they weren't extremely active in trying to get free agents to sign.
LeBron to Dallas, huh? Has that been a topic? Dallas is like one of the only teams I haven't heard LeBron associated with.
Yeah, LeBron's going to the Lakers. Let's all be.
I would be remiss and in trouble with Trailblazer fans if I didn't ask how Wesley Matthews is doing. You might know that he was a huge fan favorite up in Portland, and people were quite sad when he left. And how's he doing?
So I have to say that I really love Wes. I've been around him in the locker room. I've been, I know the Mavericks are huge fans of his. He is just, as you guys well know, he's just an incredible person. He's an incredible person in terms of like being a team leader and being a tough guy and just laying it all out there on the court. And I think he's really endeared himself to Mavericks fans and to the organization for just the way he plays, his attitude, his leadership. So we all really like him in Dallas. I know the team really likes him. The injury was unfortunate. It's a stress fracture in his right fibula. We haven't really heard anything more about that. I think news about that just broke not long ago. It looks like it was around middle of March. So, word at the time was he would likely miss the rest of the season, the way the rest of the Mavericks have been.
Yeah. They're certainly not rushing him back.
They've been conveniently dropping like flies with injuries. I'm putting that in air quotes, even though no one can see it. So I don't see him coming back this season. I no doubt that he'll be back next season and probably, just as tough as ever. I have been kind of disappointed, though. I know he was really hoping, and everyone was really hoping, that with the contract he originally signed with Dallas, he'd be able to get back some of that former glory that he had with the Blazers for those couple of seasons where he got really great. And I just think that the injury is going to be too much to overcome. But, no one really comes back from those really well. But he's been great, and it's been a joy having him on the team. And, I hope he sticks around. And if not, I hope he was able to go somewhere where he can, actually do some stuff in the playoffs and, maybe win a championship, because he deserves it.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that nobody in Portland, I don't think would ever, I don't know. I don't think people would be, I think people would be happy for him if he won a championship. We would all rather wish that he had won it here, because they were they were on fire when he went. I was in the arena when he went down, and it was just like, he's fine. He's fine. He's fine. He's fine. He's going to get up. He's going to be fine. He's fine. He's Wesley Matthews. He's fine. Yeah. And that's not what happened. Yeah. It was quite depressing. So, one more question about the team, and as somebody who's been in the locker room for a couple of years, covering Dirk, Wesley Matthews, do you have any favorite stories that you tell people about players or interactions or fun things that happened to you while you were covering the team?
Yeah, I actually have a couple. So I'll give you two that are my favorites. The first one happened when I was in Dallas, and it was probably the first and only time I broke a story, and it wasn't really a significant story, so it'll make you laugh. It was back when Monte Ellis played for the Mavericks. And you know how when you're in the arena, they'll do they'll occasionally do the dance cam, and some little kid will win it, and it's always really great. So we were all joking in the press box that day because some little kid wearing, I think it was it was a Gucci sweatshirt. Mm-hmm. So some little kid wearing a Gucci sweatshirt won the dance cam contest. We were all just joking about it. And later on in the locker room, we're all talking to Monte, and someone asked him, and his son was there wearing the Gucci sweatshirt. And so someone asked him, they're like, wait, was that your kid who won the dance cam contest? And he was like, oh yeah, no, he's great. And so I immediately booked it back to the media room and wrote the story about Monte Ellis' son winning the dance cam contest. And the only story I've ever broken, but I'm still really proud of it. Yeah. Great.
Versatile. Nice job.
The other story that's this one's probably actually my favorite story was when I was back in Southern California, but I was up at a Mavs Clippers game, and if anyone remembers, Mark Cuban has a pretty good history of being fined, and so that was back before it was when Stern was still the commissioner. I think it was right at the very end, and the Clippers came back to win that game. It was a Mavs Clippers game, and they came back to win that game being down 16 points in the last 2 minutes or something crazy like that. It was an absurd comeback victory for the Clippers. And so Cuban storms the court. He got fined $100,000 for storming the court. And he comes back down into the tunnel, and because the team was traveling, it was just me and like two other guys, because I lived in Southern California, and there's like, the Dallas Morning News guy, and like I think it was Earl or something like that, who travels with the team. And so Cuban storms down into the tunnel, and I guess there had been some foul, and I think it was Sean Marion at the time. And he looks at me and Eddie Sefko from the Dallas Morning News, and he looks straight at me. He's like, "Did you see that play? What did you think of that play?" And I just like stopped dead. I'm like, I don't know. Mark Cuban just asked me my opinion about something. I don't know what the right answer to this question is. And I remembered the play, but I was so flustered, and I was like, yeah, I saw that. I thought that was crazy. Like what non-committal answer can I give here? And so he says something, and I'm struggling to remember at the time what it was. He gives some like crazy answer, and Eddie Sefko asks, he's like, "Is that on the record?" He's like, "Yeah, it's on the record. Yeah, it's on the record." And just like walks back into the locker room, which wasn't open to the media yet. And so then their assistant director of communications comes back out and looks at me and Eddie. He's like, "Don't tweet any of that yet." And of course we had already tweeted it all. It was hilarious. And I just kind of looked at Eddie, and I'm like, "He said on the record." And he's like, "No, he said on the record." I'm like, "Okay, I just wanted to make sure I heard that." But it was kind of a funny moment of me being like I wouldn't say lowly, but like a lowly blogger standing next to the Dallas Morning News guy and Mark Cuban, basically both treating us like we were equals, which was kind of cool.
It's like your blog boy moment, right?
Like,
I can't stop making blog boy references all week. That Kevin Durant, Bill Simmons interview just was so rich. I just can't stop.
Pretty amazing.
Let's see. So before we close, I have one last topic that I want to ask you about, and that is NBA 101 basketball for women. Now, yeah. I first learned about NBA 101 basketball for women through some tweeting. I think it was out 2016. Yahoo Sports wrote this story about this event that the Dallas Mavericks were holding called NBA 101 basketball for women, and the Yahoo thing was like all about like how offensive it was, and I saw it first and I was like, oh my god, that's so offensive. And because it was like obviously insinuating that women don't know anything about basketball, right. But I was like, you know what, before I really complain about this, I need to find out what this is. So I went on the Dallas website and I learned about NBA 101 basketball for women. And it's like you can tell more about it, but it's like a women only event where women come in and they get to talk to coaches. They got to learn about the game. They get to learn about how a team is run. And I was like, this sounds super cool. Like I would love to do something like this. So there was a lot of bad press and publicity about this event, but it also sounded like super interesting. So I'm wondering, did you attend, and what are your thoughts and feelings about NBA 101 basketball for women?
So I did not attend, but we had another female reporter on or a female staffer who did attend, and so she wrote something about it. And, it was very interesting because I think part of the reason it was so controversial when it was announced, and the Mavs have actually been doing this event for like a decade. So this is not a new thing for them. But I think for whatever reason, at the time it came out, it garnered some publicity. And I don't know if it was just because it was a dead time in the NBA, or I don't remember. But there's been a lot of other of these like kind of ladies' night type events that don't really go over very well. So I think it was just kind of that it got some random publicity at a time where these events for women are being closely scrutinized. And, the marketing that came out around it, and I think this is what caused some of the controversies, the marketing that came out around it was like pink text and
sparkles. There were sparkles.
There's like sparkles and pink text. And, the Mavs do have like a women's fan club that either used to be called or is still called Hoops and Heels, which I've always thought was super offensive. And, because like I'm not wearing heels to games. Let's be real. It's a game. And, so it was very interesting in that it came out around that time. And so we wrote two pieces about it. The first one we wrote was kind of in defense of the concept of it. We did criticize the marketing. We thought, the pink really does miss the mark. Like not all women wear pink. Like pink is not a team color. Like, let's be real and let's be a little more respectful of these women that you're trying to recruit to come to this event. But at the same time, we thought, what a cool thing to have a women's only event that really allows women the safety to learn in an environment that's maybe a little less patronizing, in terms of guys who might be coming to these events who already know a lot about basketball and would potentially talk down to women, who are trying to learn in kind of a safe environment. And so, in that sense, the Mavericks really do this event well. They do bring in women who are, I think there's a lot of them who are season ticket holders, but a lot who are outside who are just, they really do kind of want to learn about basketball in an environment where they don't feel like they're being talked down to or critiqued or, looked down on for wanting to learn more and for not knowing as much as they actually do. And I think that's really cool. There are some organizations who have done these types of events or have purported to do these types of events who have not done them well. And they really have been like, the cleat chasers of the world, just trying to get their pictures with players and things like that. And that's not the type of event this is. And so I think when there was all this controversy around it, that's what people were equating it with. And it really is kind of one of the better done events of this type around sports. So kudos to the Mavericks for doing an event like this and doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, when I read about it, like I said, I was like, that sounds really cool. And I was like, of course, the first thing I did was I looked up to find out if the Trailblazers did that. And I was like, well, no, I don't see anything that the Trailblazers have ever done that. And I was like, well, maybe there's some other group of women out there, because when I think about it, some of the most, avid and passionate fans that I know are women. And so I was like, there's got to be, some forum or some venue for, women who all love the Trailblazers. And there really is no unifying organization or overarching organization. So like, I just started these meetups because I figured there would be one in existence and there wasn't. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll start Women's Hoops and Talks and see who comes. Yeah. And it's not like we have the access that they do in Dallas when they put on this big event. But I thought I wanted to start building something so that someday in the future, the Blazers might decide they want to do something like that. And I think the key for that to be a success is if it's run and planned by women for women. And if they just turn it over to women to run it, and let the women do the marketing and let them decide what is going to go over well. Because, I mean, women are a huge part of the fan base. And also, by the way, they're a huge part of the fan base that spends a lot of money. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, in a lot of families, it's the women who make the purchasing decisions. So, yeah. I mean, if I was an NBA team, I would be doing more events like this. Do you know anything about the name of the group aside, Hoops and Heels? Do you know anything more about that organization? Do they still exist? Are they around?
My understanding is that the branding around that Hoops and Heels does not exist anymore. And I think it was really more of they called it like the Lady MFFLs, which is Mavs fan for life. It's kind of your Mavericks fan motto, but they call it the Lady MFFLs. I think they retired the Hoops and Heels jargon. But it's, that particular thing was just more of like a fan club thing for season ticket holders. And I don't think that was really like intended to educate, as opposed to this event that they were doing every year that really was targeted towards like bringing, like educating. And so they're two like distinct things. And I've I don't know. I mean, there's so much merchandise out there, and we have another writer on our staff, Kate Crawford, who, we keep an eye on like the women's fan gear that comes out every year, so that we can make fun of like, I'm not sure every team has them, but like, the blue and silver bedazzled like high heels and, like the glitter shirts and things like that. And we write an article occasionally, like just mocking all of the bad fashion that's out there for women fans.
Yeah. But, on the one hand, it's there's some really amazing fashions out there for women, but like on the other hand, like I like pink and I like sparkles, and if I see something that's cute and it has a Blazer pinwheel on it, like I'm gonna want to buy it. So it's really it's become really hard to like know like how to be a fan. Like, is it okay to be a fan like this? And I've sort of come to the opinion that there's like no wrong way to be a fan. There's just a whole bunch of like different ways to be a fan. And one of the like women have been sort of marginalized in terms of being able to learn about stuff, because what I've found as I've tried to learn more about basketball is that I'm afraid to get a word in edgewise, because I don't want to like ask a question and sound stupid. Yeah. And so like I went to this referee thing once where a referee came and he answered questions about, and like the whole time I like kind of like really timidly held up my hand, but I didn't just like hold it up and, blurt out a question. And so my question never got answered, and guess whose questions all got answered. Yeah. So just having a place where I would not feel so intimidated, I guess. Does that make sense?
No, and that's what the Mavericks, I think, are really trying to do with this 101 event, is they're really trying to have an environment where women do feel like they can ask their questions and not feel like, they're going to get overshadowed by a guy who really just wants to know like the details of, the intricacies of a certain type of play or, something like that. I mean, I'll be honest, like I'm a pretty recent NBA fan, and I just kind of figured out how to identify a pick and roll on my screen last season. So
yeah,
I'm never going to be the most technical expert person in the room, but I can talk circles around a lot of people a lot of guys who claim to be sports fans and are really only casual fans. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I'm toyed with the idea of like someday saving up my money and like flying down to attend just to see what it's like. 'Cause I think it would be really interesting, and I would love to replicate that.
Yeah.
Sometime in other places, just to give other women a chance to do that kind of thing.
Well, and I think it's what you're doing in terms of bringing women together and, giving them that space to kind of talk about sports in a way that they don't have in a lot of communities, because it really is true that we do, have to prove ourselves a little bit more than the average fan sometimes. So I think it's awesome that you just kind of took it upon yourself to do that.
Well, when you're in Portland, you got to come, and if you come during the season, you can plan and come to a Women's Hoops and Talks, and you can bring your new daughter, and she can come to her first Women's Hoops and Talks meetup in Portland, or you could start your own in San Diego.
Well, one of my best friends lives in Portland, so that's definitely a thing that I want to get out and do.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to meeting you face to face someday. It's been awesome talking to you tonight. Yes. Before we go, we always have one last question that we ask everybody. Okay. And that is, who is a woman who inspires you in sports or not in sports?
That's a great question. And, I thought a lot about it because you had kind of given me that in advance. And I thought really hard about it. And, there's two kind of answers to that. One of them is, honestly, this is going to sound so cliche, but my mom. Like, she has just really been an awesome example. She's not a huge sports fan, ironically enough, but she's just been like a great example for me in my life. She's always got some cool independent project going on. She's always got some new thing or interesting idea for like something she could be doing outside of just her job. And, that's really inspired me to be creative in my hobbies and, in reaching out to different people and, figuring out kind of what I want to do outside of just my career. So that's one thing. And then another person who I really admire a lot, and I think I mentioned her name earlier, the Mavericks have a director of communication, Sarah Melton, who I've come to respect her tremendously. I've seen her work the locker room. For her to be in a position of that kind of authority within an NBA organization is just really, really cool. And it just kind of goes to show that, women do have a place in NBA locker rooms and in sports locker rooms, and they can have significant positions in these kinds of organizations and have it be authoritative and have it be respected. And I think that's so cool. And I really admire her for that.
Cool. Well, kudos to your mom for being an inspiration for you to figure out how to expand your life and enrich your life with lots of different hobbies, and sports being one of them. That's awesome. Before we go, do you want to let people know where they can find your work?
Sure. So I'm, as mentioned, I'm the editor-in-chief of Mavs Moneyball. So you can find us at mavsmoneyball.com. You can find me on Twitter at BeccaAfter6, and you can find the blog on Twitter at Mavs Moneyball.
Awesome. Well, thanks. That's going to do it for this edition of Women's Hoops and Talks, the What Podcast. We are hosted by Blazers Edge, which is part of the Almighty Baller Radio Network. If you like what you heard, please go find Blazers Edge Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe and rate and review. We release new episodes of the What Podcast every other Thursday. If you just want to get notified when the What Podcast episodes are released, you can follow us on @Hoops&Talks. I'm on Twitter at TCBBiggs, and Kendall, who will be back with us soon, she is also on Twitter at KendallBennett16. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.